supply chain crisis, the White House scrambling to fix the emergency at our ports. The president announcing around-the-clock operations as a major backlog of container ships, forcing prices to skyrocket and leaving shelves empty. But will it be enough to save the holiday shopping season? One of the most influential voices on Wall Street joining Top Story Live for a reality check on the economy. Also breaking tonight, the bow and arrow massacre in Norway. Several people killed in a brutal attack that began inside a supermarket. What we've just learned about the suspect. Plus, Havana Syndrome exclusive. Andrea Mitchell sits down with 3 victims of the mystery illness, speaking out for the first time on television about their brutal symptoms and the brain damage they're left with. The man tasked with finding bin Laden now in charge of finding out what's going on. The disturbing body cam footage showing officers in Indiana repeatedly kicking a man who was on the ground in handcuffs. The criminal charges a police sergeant is now facing. The big boost to Social Security, nearly 70 million Americans will see their checks going up, the highest increase in decades. And Squid Game obsession, the Korean series shattering a new record for Netflix. But the question tonight, why is the show so violent, so graphic, so popular? Top Story starts right now. And good evening, I'm Tom Llamas. We begin Top Story tonight with the supply chain emergency. The White House looking to relieve a major backlog at some of the nation's busiest ports. President Biden before the cameras today addressing the massive delays that are driving up prices and leaving store shelves empty. The president announcing around-the-clock operations at both the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, where lines of cargo ships are waiting to unload. The president also calling on some of the nation's leading retailers and shippers to commit to 24/7 work hours. Americans already feeling the impact, but the situation expected to get worse as the country prepares for the holiday shopping season. Experts now urging people to buy their presents early because products will be hard to find and expensive. NBC's Miguel Almaguer leads us off tonight from L.A.
Tonight, the LA traffic jam creating shipping gridlock across the nation. Facing a crush of cargo backed up for miles and for months, the White House meeting today with some of the country's largest shipping carriers and authorities at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, announcing operations here will run 24/7 to ease the massive backlog.
Today's announcement has the potential to be a game changer. I say potential, because all of these goods won't move by themselves.
The complex delays at the nation's busiest ports, accounting for 40% of the country's container traffic, affects consumers from coast to coast. Bins filled with everyday products, from electronics to apparel, may not make it onto store shelves or front porches in time for the holidays. At Lay and Go, there's demand but little supply.
Everything has been breaking down. We are trying to be resilient, which we always are as small businesses, but it's affecting us being able to do our job.
Products aren't just harder to get, but more expensive. Inflation at a 13-year high. Prices for beef and bacon, used cars, gas, even furniture, all up double digits. The Social Security Administration announcing its largest cost of living adjustment in nearly 40 years.
Have you ever seen a backlog like this ever?
Never. We've never seen anything like this.
To help bust the bottleneck, the White House says the Longshoremen's Union has agreed to work around the clock. Walmart, FedEx, and UPS also committing to work off-peak hours, with other major national retailers to follow suit.
Everything we're seeing today was induced by the pandemic. Right now, we're on track to handle 20 million container units in Southern California. We've never handled anything close to that.
To help ensure shelves are stocked and deliveries do arrive, freight and trucking commitments to move parcels from ports across rails and highways must also be secured, fast-tracking the tangled web of trans-Pacific and cross-country shipping, a monumental task.
But something like the python trying to swallow the alligator, that's the kind of volume that we're trying to send through our ports right now.
Tonight, the promise of progress at some of the nation's busiest ports as the country hopes officials can deliver.
All right, Miguel Almaguer joining us now live from the port there. You can see in the water those container ships just behind him. Miguel, you're seeing this up close tonight. What can you tell us? The big question tonight is, when will this bottleneck clear up?
Yeah, not for quite some time, Tom. And we're told there's about 60 of these massive cargo ships, and this is one of the lucky ones that's being unloaded. If you look down here, you'll see more of them in the distance. This one also being unloaded, but there's about 60 more vessels just off the coast here that are beginning to get their interior coming into the port here. It takes several days to unload these massive cargo ships. We're told by the middle of next summer, they may be caught up. Tom?
All right, Miguel Almaguer for us tonight. Miguel, with that up-close look, we appreciate it. Staying now with the growing economic impact of inflation and the supply chain slowdown, I want to bring in a special guest. Tom Lee, he's the co-founder and head of research at Fundstrat Global Advisors, an independent financial research firm and CNBC contributor. If you've never heard of Tom, just know when Tom Lee talks, Wall Street listens. Tom, welcome to Top Story. I know this is your first time on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
Let's get
Tom.
right to the heart of this issue. We saw those images that Miguel was just showing us there. What type of impact is this having on the economy?
Well, it's creating shortages because these ships are piled outside and people want to get stuff delivered, so they're starting to pay more money and panicking. And so it's creating price pressures that, you know, looks like inflation. But as your correspondent said, it looks like we can actually work through this bottleneck, and hopefully by next summer it's gone.
Yeah, we hope so. We're hearing a lot from the Biden administration and the Fed with this word transitory inflation, and that essentially means temporary inflation. But you were just telling me people have to be careful because that temporary inflation could be 12 months.
That's right. The real risk is when prices go up and then it changes people's expectations, so it gets anchored. But if we've got the situation that lasts 12 months and it starts to ease, that would in fact be transitory. You know, it happened earlier this year with lumber. You know, we've had it many times with things like corn and grain and even, you know, other commodities. So I think as long as we don't have a persistent shortage, it ends up being transitory.
Wall Street investors pay a lot of money for your research. When are you telling your people we think prices will come back down or they'll at least get back to normal?
It's going to be, we're in a really difficult period right now because you won't have any clarity until next year. So people have to decide whether they believe it's transitory or not. That's why the markets are really confused.
Okay, let's go to jobs now. There are 10 million people, 10 million job openings across the U.S. I have some stats here. More than 30 million Americans quit their jobs from January to August. Amazon can raise wages, but mom and pop shops can't. What exactly is going on?
Yeah, well, one, I think this is a great, I'm so happy for workers, you know, because they're finally in a position where they can sort of decide what kind of jobs they like. But COVID has made this quite difficult, too. Roughly 4 million people a month aren't working because they have to take care of somebody with COVID. That's about 10 months of jobs. So we are really taking people out of the workforce because they got to watch somebody with COVID.
But break this down for me, Tom, because I've read some of your research, and you point out almost always in your newsletters about the COVID cases coming down.
Yes.
So when will these sort of the normalcy of people going back to jobs happen, do you think?
Again, it's really difficult to say, but it looks like a lot of things by next summer look better because we'll have better treatments for COVID. It looks like the Delta variant's going to be behind us, and then the bottlenecks that have really piled up outside the ports of LA and New York should be cleared up. So I think, but unfortunately, it's going to take months, but by next summer, it looks like things will look normal.
Okay, and then finally, you know, the markets predict usually what's supposed to happen. The market right now is not bad. It's actually pretty good, but you have these supply chain issues, you have prices going up, you have people not returning to work, a lot of uncertainty in the economy. Is something about to hit?
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at the stock market, it's saying, look, the market's telling us they're quite uncertain about a lot of things, but they feel pretty good about things like oil prices. That's why energy stocks are doing well. And while they're a little worried about technology because they've done so well, I mean, companies like Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, I mean, these are long-term winners, and they're holding up great, and they look like they're about to start to recover. And if they recover, the stock market's is going to rally.
The rest of the economy, though, briefly, how do you think we're going to be on solid footing going forward?
That's right. It looks like there's what we would say is pent-up demand. A lot of people delayed activity and travel because of either bottlenecks or concerns about health. These are good things because once things normalize, there's a relief and people start to spend.
All right, Tom Lee, we hope you are right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We want to turn now to coronavirus and the major headlines on booster shots. A new study finding it's safe and effective to get a booster different from your original vaccine, but it comes amid mounting questions over Johnson & Johnson's extra dose. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has it all for us tonight.
Tonight, the FDA is questioning the evidence Johnson & Johnson provided in its application for booster shots. While FDA scientists did say there may be a benefit from a second J&J dose 2 months after the initial dose, the agency noted the data is limited, saying a key test used by the company was likely not sensitive enough, adding the FDA didn't have enough time to independently review much of the raw data from the trials ahead of an advisory panel meeting this Friday. It's not clear whether these concerns would be enough to delay emergency use authorization.
We have the vaccine supply and we will be ready to hit the ground running as soon as any additional boosters are authorized.
And now a new highly anticipated study by the NIH shows mixing and matching vaccine boosters is safe and effective. The study added J&J COVID vaccine recipients are better off getting Pfizer or Moderna boosters. The FDA advisory panel will review it on Friday. Meanwhile, the White House is also telling governors to start preparing to vaccinate children as young as 5 by early next month in anticipation of clearance of Pfizer's COVID vaccine for that age group in the coming weeks.
By vaccinating kids, we'll have fewer breakthrough cases, fewer cases in schools, and less transmission at home.
New data shows last week COVID cases in the U.S. dropped 12% from the previous week. Hospitalizations down 11%. Still,
despite the recent decrease in cases, most communities across the country are still experiencing substantial to high levels of community transmission, and we're certainly not at a place where our cases are in a control area.
But there may be some light at the end of the tunnel. Starting in November, the Biden administration will lift restrictions at the U.S. borders with Canada and Mexico for fully vaccinated travelers. For 19 months, all non-essential travelers, including family members and tourists, could not cross, hurting Gloria Bayaco's gift shop in Detroit, right across from Windsor, Canada. What has that done to your business?
Well, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. You know, first it came to a screeching halt with the shutdown. That was devastating for everybody.
Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from Detroit. He's near the Canadian border at one of the busiest crossings in the country. So, Gabe, the big question is, how will this be different from air travel?
Yeah, Tom, unlike air travel, visitors will not have to show a negative COVID test, provided they meet the vaccine requirements. Tom?
All right, Gabe, thank you for that. We're also following breaking news tonight out of Norway, where police say a man armed with a bow and arrow killed multiple people about 50 miles outside of Oslo. The deadly spree starting in a supermarket, and we're just learning the suspect is in custody. Let's get right to Keir Simmons.
Tonight, these shadowy images of a dark-coloured arrow lodged in the wall of a building, the aftermath of an attack that killed multiple people. Police on the streets of a Norwegian town reporting an assailant armed with a bow and arrow was arrested and appeared to have acted alone. At 6:13 tonight, the local police chief says there were several reports of a man moving around with a weapon, a bow and arrows. There were injuries and fatalities. The bizarre attacks happened in the town of Kongsberg, 50 miles from the capital, Oslo. Tonight, Norway's Prime Minister describing the attacks as horrifying, saying, "I know people are afraid, but police have the situation under control." Tonight, police are not searching for more suspects. The motive for the attack, still unclear. The method, a bow and arrow, stunning Norwegians. Tom, tonight reports say police believe the assailant simply walked around shooting people. Tom?
Keir Simmons on that breaking news tonight for us. Keir, thank you. And tonight back here in the States, the flooding threat for parts of the central U.S. as the region recovers from multiple days of severe storms. Reported tornadoes touching down in Kansas and Oklahoma last night, knocking out power to thousands of customers, and new video showing the extensive damage to an airport in western Oklahoma, a plane and multiple cars destroyed. And now tropical depression Pamela expected to bring heavy rain to the area. Flash flood watches in effect across Texas. WNBC weather anchor Dave Price is here on Top Story tonight. He's tracking it all for us. Dave, good evening.
Yeah, Tom, this is a weakened storm, but the issue not so much the winds, it's the moisture, it's the rain. Tropical depression Pamela, now the 16th named storm in the eastern Pacific hurricane season, 255 miles to the northeast of Mazatlan. It's not so much where it is, but it's where it's going that's the concern. Winds now down to 35 miles per hour, heading to the northeast at 28 miles per hour, right over Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, central and northeastern Texas. And flood watches, that's going to be a big concern over the next 24 to 48 hours. Potentially 14 million people impacted, with creeks and streams potentially rising out of their banks. Dallas typically gets 4 inches of rain during this month, and we could see between 5 and 7 inches possible as this storm rolls through Texas. Growing season for the most part done. Cotton crops still a concern. This is going to be a concern as we head through the next couple of days. Tom?
All right, Dave, we know you'll stay tracking it. We thank you for that. Next tonight, the Havana Syndrome exclusive. 5 years after U.S. diplomats in Cuba began suffering from the mysterious illnesses, the cause remains unknown. Now there are hundreds of reported cases around the world, and for the first time on television, Andrea Mitchell sat down with 3 of the syndrome's first known victims.
In the winter of 2016, diplomats Kate Husband and Doug Ferguson were working at the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba. Their nights at home interrupted by a piercing noise coming from their backyard.
I'll just play it for you so you can hear.
It was a lot worse earlier. It was persistent, kind of at the same level all the time. Very, very loud. It's nothing you could sit with.
Kate, did anyone else in your neighborhood have this experience at their homes?
Yeah, on our right was another embassy family, and then the people on our left and across the street from us were both Canadian embassy employees. And in the end, all 4 households were diagnosed.
In a nearby neighborhood, Tina Onifer, who worked with Kate and Doug at the embassy, was washing dishes one night in March of 2017.
The kids were upstairs playing, and I was standing at the kitchen window, and all of a sudden I felt like I was being struck with something.
What was it like?
It was gripping. It was like I had been seized by some invisible hand, and I couldn't move.
Tina, Kate, and Doug didn't know it then, but they were among the first victims of a still unexplained phenomenon that has come to be known as Havana Syndrome, with more than 200 Americans around the world, mostly U.S. diplomats and spies, reporting neurological and other symptoms.
The primary injury I have is what they're calling an acquired brain injury.
An acquired brain injury related to a directional phenomenon exposure. What did the neurologist tell you about the changes in your brain?
He said, well, it's like you aged, 20, 25 years all at once.
How is your health today?
It's not easy to talk about our health because it's an invisible injury. It's 4.5 years of excruciating headaches. It's 4.5 years of stumbling, losing my balance, 4.5 years of vision degradation.
People don't understand what this kind of brain damage can do to you.
Despite the rising number of reported cases, there is still skepticism. Some have suggested it's mass hysteria. But doctors who've examined the diplomats for the State Department and a National Academy of Sciences panel that studied their illnesses have reached a different conclusion.
I don't know why this happened to these individuals, but I do think it was deliberate.
Stanford professor David Relman led the panel that reported the most likely explanation was directed pulsed radio frequency energy.
There are many international actors who would have the means of deploying a technology like this.
How do you feel when you hear all the doubters who say, oh, it's psychogenic, it's mass hysteria?
I mean, I have verified physical injuries. I spent about 9 months trying to do my old job, little pieces of it, a few hours a day. They call it work hardening after a brain injury. And I felt sick all the time.
While Doug has recovered and is now based at the U.S. Embassy in Paris, Kate's diplomatic service is over, and Tina's rising career cut short.
I work 2 hours a day, if I'm lucky, remotely here in our house. As much skepticism as still seems to surround this, it's very real.
Lives forever altered, the diplomats are speaking out now to put a face on the unexplained mystery.
These are just normal folks from Michigan who are out there serving their country, and this thing happened. And I want the viewers to understand that this is real, this happened, this is happening.
It's very easy for people to be dismissive and say, but you look fine. But the reality is I'm not. And I don't think very many of us are. And we just want to have our lives back.
Okay, Andrea Mitchell joins us now. Andrea, the officers in your piece were all stationed in Havana at one point, but since then, people stationed in other parts of the world, including most recently in Colombia, have reported suffering from these symptoms. Is there any pattern in the countries where these incidents have happened? And if not, how can investigators piece together who's behind this?
Well, Tom, that is exactly the problem. You've centered on what the issue is, because they can't. They can't figure out whether it is a device or maybe it's been turned into a weapon by some hostile power. It's happened in India, in Vienna, in Berlin, most recently reportedly in Bogota, Colombia, in Hanoi. So since there's no pattern to this, certainly in Moscow, yes, all over China, who is behind it? They believe it is a global power. So that takes the onus really off of the Cubans, because Cuba doesn't have that kind of global power, which Russia, China, perhaps Iran would have. Those are the leading contenders, but they don't know, and those countries have all denied responsibility.
And so hard to protect diplomats because they're not even sure what the weapon is. Last Friday, we know President Biden signed the Havana Act, which improves victims' access to medical care. What other measures is the administration doing and the State Department taking to protect current diplomats abroad?
Well, the real lead has been the CIA, with William Burns, the CIA director, who has put the officer who was in charge of the hunt for Osama bin Laden in charge of this. He's taken it very, very seriously. Also, these victims now can go to Walter Reed, where the same doctors who treat brain trauma from our returning soldiers are treating them. And they say that their injuries are the same. Their brain scans also from other medical centers have shown sometimes permanent brain damage, brain trauma. So it's real. That's why these people are speaking out. They want Americans to know this is happening. They want their other colleagues to try to protect themselves. People are told, get away from the area, the X, where you first get hit. Get away from that as quickly as possible. Get medical help. Early treatment is the key to preventing permanent damage.
Andrea Mitchell with that big exclusive tonight. Andrea, thank you. Staying in Washington now, the Social Security Administration announcing a nearly 6% increase in benefits next year. The decision fueled by a spike in inflation due to economic disruptions from the pandemic, like supply chain bottlenecks and worker shortages. NBC White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins us tonight from the White House. Kelly, walk us through why this is happening and when can Americans who qualify start to see the boost?
Well, Tom, it's so significant because this is the largest increase since 1982, 5.9%. So if you look at the averages, that's about $90 to $100 a month for many recipients who often base a lot of their income on that Social Security check, retirees, those with disabilities. But while that is very good news compared to recent years where it might be a negligible increase of just over 1%, it really reflects the larger concerns that many people who rely on this are living with. Higher prices at the gas pump and at the grocery store. Tom?
Kelly, you know, back in August, the Social Security Administration released a report saying the fund that most Americans rely on for their retirement will run out of money in 12 years. What does this all mean if we're pumping more money now?
Well, certainly this new increase is reflected in the costs, and there's a calculation they do to measure that. The Biden administration and Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen says the government will certainly protect those benefits going forward. But you're right, the numbers look to be 2033 or 34 when the current trust fund would not be able to pay for all of the benefits that it is required to. That's a political hot potato for sure. But right now, this increase is certainly reflecting the kind of everyday reality that people are seeing with higher prices and concerns about the supply chain. Tom?
Kelly O for us tonight. Kelly, thank you. Now to the place where no man older has gone before. Today, William Shatner, the man behind Star Trek's Captain Kirk, became the oldest person to venture into space. And it wasn't on the USS Enterprise, but on a Blue Origin rocket. NBC's Tom Costello at the launch site in Texas.
Command engine start. 2, 1.
Against a cloudless sky, swagger and confidence on full display today.
Has cleared the tower.
As Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin carried a beloved pop icon, Star Trek Captain James T. Kirk. Within minutes, 90-year-old William Shatner became the oldest person ever to go to space, weightless for nearly 4 minutes with his 3 fellow passengers, Blue Origin's Audrey Powers and Glenn DeVries and Chris Boshausen, who each paid an estimated $250,000 to fly.
This is nuts!
No description
can equal this.
It was a quick trip. Soon the booster rocket was landing back on the pad, while Shatner and team parachuted to a soft landing.
And capsule touchdown.
One of the world's richest men opening the hatch. Jeff Bezos grew up a Star Trek and Captain Kirk fan and invited Shatner to fly. But for Shatner, this was far more than a 10-minute joyride.
What you have given me is the most profound experience I can imagine. I'm so filled with emotion about what just happened. I hope that I can maintain what I feel now. I don't want to lose it.
Soon after, we caught up with him on the landing pad. Bill, you seemed emotional when you came down.
I still am. I am overwhelmed by what I saw. I saw death in the blackness of space. I saw life in the beauty and the warmth of Earth. I am 90, close to death. Did I see death? I don't know. I'm moved by the enormous experience I just had.
A deep appreciation for how fragile the Earth truly is. And for Blue Origin, mission accomplished.
All right, Tom Costello joins us now from the launch site near Van Horn, Texas. Tom, I got to tell you, what William Shatner just told you there, that was one of the most profound sort of sayings I've ever heard about space, somebody who's experienced space in that way. But we also do know he is an incredible actor. What was your sense? Do you think he truly felt that moment, that it was a profound moment in his life?
I do think that. And listen, I had a conversation with him last night off camera, you know, at an event nearby, just the two of us talking, and Jeff Bezos was in the room. And yeah, that's the way he feels about this. He is very, very worried about the planet. He is looking at the end of his life. He really believes he's 90 years old, and he said to me, I don't have much time left. I know that. He's worried about the future for his kids and his grandkids and future generations. Look at the video of him when they're up there, you know, and they're weightless for a few minutes. He doesn't really try to float weightless. He doesn't throw Skittles or cornflakes. He is taking it all in. He seems totally overwhelmed by the image outside his window, looking at the Earth and how thin the blue line is, right? The atmosphere. And that's the first thing he said when he came back down. So listen, he's a very good actor, and so as a result, he knows how to project and convey his feelings. But I think these were sincere. I really do.
You know, Tom, from the get-go when I heard about this, obviously there was all the attention because of Star Trek and Captain Kirk. But for me, I got to say, I was impressed that at 90, he went up there. Space travel, obviously still incredibly expensive. At some point, that could all change. Could have this possibly showed people that are older or will be older once space travel becomes a little more affordable that anyone can do this? We were talking about this sort of question earlier, and your thinking was more along the lines of the attention that came to this launch.
Oh, listen, I mean, I think we got to be honest about how this all came together, right? Bezos approached Star Trek's Captain Kirk because he wanted Captain Kirk to help sell Blue Origin. And he knew that if he put Captain Kirk on this mission, the second, by the way, so he's not going to get the same attention as the first, he knew the media would come back. We've got to cover Captain Kirk going to space. So Bezos is a brilliant marketer. We all have Amazon, probably Amazon Prime. And this was all about generating the eyeballs, keeping the company's name out there and in public. And to be clear, they are all passionate about space, not to diminish that. And Bezos is a big Star Trek buff. But ultimately, he's also trying to make sure that this is viable and they can continue to sell seats.
All right, Tom, we thank you for that. Still ahead tonight, all eyes on Virginia, a critical race for governor heating up. Why the political world is watching, could it set the tone for the 2022 midterms and even the next presidential election? Plus, show of force. North Korea's military showing off some extreme and bizarre martial arts skills. What was behind the demonstration? And the disturbing video tonight of police kicking a handcuffed man while he was on the ground. Our Priscilla Thompson is here with more on the investigation, including the police sergeant now facing felony charges. You're watching Top Story. We're just getting started. Back now with the Indianapolis police sergeant facing felony charges after disturbing body cam footage showed the officer kicking a handcuffed man in the face while he was on the ground. His superior now recommending termination and notifying federal authorities about the incident. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson has more.
I'm not the one out here complaining. Shocking new video showing the moment an Indianapolis police officer appears to kick a black man in the face while he's on the ground in handcuffs.
I'm not going to do this, right?
The body cam video, which was edited and released by police, shows Jermaine Vaughn on his back with his hands cuffed behind him and an officer on top of him. Then, police say Sergeant Eric Huxley's shoe enters the frame and kicks Vaughn in the face.
You're done. You're done.
A visibly stunned Vaughn remains on the ground, bleeding from his lip.
Roll over. I can't.
I'm upset. It hurts me to see any of our officers treat someone the way that you're going to see here shortly.
Sergeant Huxley, a 14-year veteran of the force, is now charged with 2 felonies for official misconduct and battery resulting in bodily injury, according to court documents. Now, the U.S. Attorney General and FBI launching their own investigation, promising appropriate action if they find prosecutable offenses. Huxley's attorney denies his client acted illegally or with any criminal intent and says that he has had an exemplary career. Adding in a statement to NBC News, he is very sorry about any pain caused to Mr. Vaughn as a result of his actions and the negative scrutiny upon his department and fellow officers. This incident resulted from his perception of the need to attempt a trained police technique that unfortunately struck Mr. Vaughn in an unintended area of his body. Police say Huxley has been suspended without pay.
My hope is that the community understands that when these things come to our attention, we'll deal with them quickly. Get those people off the force.
The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department released the footage amid an ongoing investigation into the incident that occurred late last month while police were responding to a disorderly conduct call.
To the credit of this chief, they were forthcoming and they did not need to be put in a hammerlock to do that.
Police say the other 2 officers involved, Sergeant Christopher Kibbe and Officer Matthew Shores, have both been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation.
All right, Priscilla Thompson joins us now live on set. Priscilla, that video is so hard to watch, and we have seen other incidents like this, but what is new in this case, and we just heard it there from that community activist, police are getting some credit because they sort of brought this video to light themselves, and they investigated it immediately.
Right. So the police chief says that any time a use of force incident occurs, they go back and review the body cam footage, which is how they recognize that this had happened. But one of the key questions that remains here, according to court documents, in the initial report that was written by one of the officers, there was no mention of this kick. And so had the police not gone back and reviewed that body cam footage, this may not have come to light in this way. Tom?
Okay, Priscilla Thompson, we thank you so much for that. All right, when we come back, the alarming report from TSA, the agency saying they have stopped a record number of guns at airports this year. And get this, a majority of them were loaded. Why that number is expected to rise. And have you watched Squid Game? If not, you may be alone. The show just shattering a new record for streaming giant Netflix. But what's fueling the craze? Stay with us. Back now with Top Stories news feed. Protests at the University of Delaware over the school's response to an alleged off-campus attack. 20-year-old Brandon Fryer facing several charges, accused of beating a female classmate, spraying her in the eyes with spray paint, threatening to kill her, and throwing her down a flight of stairs. The victim reportedly locked her in his apartment for hours. The university says Fryer has been, quote, separated from the school, but students are now calling for his expulsion. The bus bursting into flames on a Georgia highway. Cell phone video from a driver capturing the fully engulfed coach bus on Interstate 285. Take a look at that. No passengers were on board, thankfully, at the time, and the driver made it out safely. Traffic impacted for hours, though, in both directions. The TSA says they have stopped a record number of firearms at airports this year. The agency says nearly 4,500 passengers tried to carry guns onto their flights, and more than 80% of them were loaded, the number already surpassing the record set in 2019, and it's expected to rise as Americans travel for the holidays. Airlines also combating unprecedented level of unruly passengers. Turning now to Virginia, where all eyes are on a critical governor's race there. It could set the tone for 2022 and even the next presidential election. Some voters already heading to the polls, and NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is there with a look at the state of this race.
Well, folks, how are we doing today?
Tonight, an inside look at the first major election in the Joe Biden era, the hotly contested race for Virginia governor, with Republicans looking to take it from the Democrats in favored candidate Terry McAuliffe.
Trump wants to declare a big victory here and then use that as a launch pad.
And so if you do not win this race, is that an indictment on the Democratic Party then?
Yeah. Well, I think if we don't win, well, first of all, we're going to win the race, but...
McAuliffe, a well-known establishment Democrat, a longtime friend of the Clintons, and he's already been a governor here before.
I'm just going to fight as hard as I can to keep us a blue state.
But this is 2021, and what happens here? If the Republican upsets McAuliffe, it could be a barometer of the races to come.
And that's why we're heading 1 hour south of here to where that Republican candidate, Glenn Youngkin, is.
Because on paper, it's a long road for the GOP. 4 years ago, the Democrat who ran for governor here won by 9 points. And just last year, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in Virginia by 10, which sets up the question, does that kind of high Democratic energy hold?
There is something absolutely amazing going on across the Commonwealth of Virginia.
The GOP now relying on its own enthusiasm.
Our liberal leadership believes that government knows best what's for your children. And let me tell you, folks, I believe the exact opposite.
The former private equity firm CEO is in a tough spot. He needs strong turnout from the Trump loyalists, like those here in rural Culpeper, where Trump won by 20% last year. The former president's endorsement should help. The campaign denying our request, though, for an interview.
Do you mind if we ever ask you for a few quick questions here?
We're running late.
But Republicans must also find a way to win back thousands of suburban voters, where in some places there's been a 40-point swing.
Suburban voters are not going to care as much about party labels or about ideology. They're going to care a lot more about who you are, what you stand for, what are you delivering for me and for my family.
Yet Virginia's Democrats may face the consequences of their party's challenges in Washington. Biden's 44% approval rating, rising inflation, a migrant crisis, and stalled efforts to pass a major infrastructure package.
Have stalled efforts in Washington hindered the Democratic Party's your efforts here in Virginia?
You know, listen, I would like that $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Let's be crystal clear. Get in a room, negotiate, get both these bills passed. We need it for America.
And the state has shown resistance to D.C. in the past.
In 10 of the last 11 elections for governor, Virginia voters have selected the candidate from the party opposite of the party that's in the White House. You've set up this race as a referendum on Youngkin and Trump.
Yeah.
So will this race also be a referendum on you and Joe Biden and this Democratic Party?
I think who wins will be the vision of what people think going forward.
And for Democrats, a test to hold on to power and that vision.
Ah, we did it. 10.
Okay, Vaughn Hilliard joins us now live from Richmond, Virginia. Vaughn, we heard there from the candidates, and you were interviewed at least one of them. I'm curious if you spoke to voters and what are the issues that they really care about going into this race?
Yeah, Tom, Donald Trump is still very much at the front of their minds. At the same time, that is why you are seeing Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate, not make any mention of Donald Trump here today, because in these last couple of months, he's tried to focus on other issues, particularly targeting those suburban voters. The idea of critical race theory being taught in schools, the idea that McAuliffe is not opposed to sexually explicit material appearing in the classroom, but then also the vaccine mandates, mask mandates, some of those issues that separate him from Donald Trump, but hit at the heart of what families are going through. At the same time, the insurrection from earlier this year still very much looms over this race, and Terry McAuliffe and the Democrats say, hey, we've already served 4 successful years as Virginia governor, give us another 4. Tom?
All right, Vaughn Hilliard there live for us tonight in Virginia. Vaughn, we thank you for all that reporting. Next to Top Stories Global Watch and the murder of a world champion runner. 25-year-old Kenyan runner Agnes Tirop was found stabbed to death at her home. Tirop had just won bronze at the Tokyo Olympics. Authorities say her husband is the main suspect and remains on the run tonight. The UK's environmental agency issuing a dire warning on climate change. Officials saying the country is heading towards a flooding emergency similar to the one in Western Germany this summer. An estimated 200 people died. The agency says the UK is not prepared for the impacts of climate change, saying it's, quote, time to adapt or die. And North Korea's military showing a new kind of force. Check this out. Soldiers performing an extreme martial arts demonstration for leader Kim Jong-un. The demonstration, dubbed Self-Defense 2021, marked the 26th founding anniversary of the country's ruling party. During the event, Kim said the country's weapons development is necessary to face the hostilities of the U.S. and South Korea. And next tonight, the Squid Game obsession continues as millions are streaming the dark and disturbing hit series.
두 번째 게임은 설탕 뽑기입니다. 선택하신 모양은 여러분이 뽑아야 할 모양입니다.
One of the more stressful scenes there from Squid Game. The South Korean drama, now Netflix's biggest ever series, watched by 111 million users in its first 28 days. It knocked Bridgerton out of the top spot and is currently the platform's #1 show in 94 countries. Pretty impressive right there. To help us understand a little bit behind the psychology of what makes it so popular is Dr. Samuya Dave. She joins us right now. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dave, I should say. So you've watched Squid Game. I need you to explain this to me. It's just so violent and so graphic, and yet it's still so popular. What does this say about the world right now?
You know, I think a lot of the themes that we're seeing play out in the show are themes that so many people are grappling with in reality. So whether we're thinking about survival, financial and economic instability, privilege, meaning of life, what it means to be in the world. So a lot of people watching the show are seeing things that they're grappling with actually being reflected on the screen in a fictional way.
Yeah, you know, I find once you can sort of get beyond the violence and the graphic nature, which is difficult, and I do want to warn our viewers, if they haven't seen the show, they should know that it is a big part of the show. The sort of philosophical questions that they pose at these games do make you sort of think what you would do in that scenario, and they sort of lead to bigger questions. Do you think that at all has helped out the show as well?
Absolutely. I think so many times we turn to stories in order to give us a sense of meaning or to help us cope with emotions that might be difficult for us to navigate in our own lives. And this show really is a representative of that. I think that so many of us have had different questions and different stressors and situations come up, especially during the pandemic. And so the ways we might want to navigate those situations vary. And that speaks to the power of shows like this as well.
Do you think this might lead to more shows being this graphic, this violent? Or do you think sort of the plot is so interesting and the content is so addictive that that's what's sort of driving the interest in this show?
I think good stories will always prevail, and there will always be a need for those good stories. And at the same time, the pandemic has caused so many disruptions, so many changes for people. So the way they might look for outlets and for things to relate to and stories to escape into might also change. And so we might see more shows like this, and we might even see more content that also reflects the themes that we're grappling with in reality.
Okay, Dr. DeVay, we thank you so much for your take. We really do appreciate it. Coming up, the growing controversy surrounding Dave Chappelle, Netflix reversing the suspension of 3 employees, one who publicly called the comedian's new special transphobic and homophobic. And our Dasha Burns is in the house. She joins Top Story tonight with how Netflix is responding to growing calls to remove that special, including from its own staff. Stay with us. Now to the growing fallout from another Netflix show, Dave Chappelle's special facing fierce backlash over jokes he made about the trans community in his latest special. Netflix also under fire for airing the special. Now several of its employees announcing a walkout. Here's NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns.
Tonight, comedian Dave Chappelle once again at the center of a swirling controversy.
Oh, buddy, I'm in trouble now.
The polarizing stand-up drawing swift backlash for jokes in his latest special, The Closer.
Gender is a fact. This is a fact. Every human being in this room, every human being on Earth had to pass through the legs of a woman to be on Earth.
Critics characterizing the remarks as transphobic and slamming Netflix for airing them.
TERF is an acronym. Stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. This is a real thing. This is a group of women that hate transgender. They don't hate transgender women, but they look at trans women the way we blacks might look at blackface. I'm Team TERF. I agree. I agree, man. Gender is a fact.
The special prompting some to boycott the service or cut ties. Today, a group of transgender employees at Netflix announcing plans to stage a walkout next week. Netflix recently suspending 3 employees who criticized the streaming giant, but now lifting that suspension. One of the employees, trans software developer Tara Field, had openly questioned Netflix's decision to air the special, tweeting, "Promoting TERF ideology, which is what we did by giving it a platform yesterday, directly harms trans people." Netflix insisting it suspended Field and 2 others for attending an online executive meeting they were not invited to, not for speaking out. But despite growing calls to remove the special from its platforms, Netflix standing by Chappelle. In an internal memo first obtained by The Verge, the company's co-CEO writing, "We don't allow titles on Netflix that are designed to incite hate or violence, and we don't believe the closer crosses that line." But major LGBTQ advocacy organizations like GLAAD disagree.
It seems that it's cisgender people trying to tell trans people, again, what is harmful to us and what isn't.
Why is this such a serious concern beyond just entertainment for the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, none of the experiences that we have with media exist in a vacuum. So you can say that it's just jokes, but unfortunately, the millions of people who will watch a comedy special like this, for many of them, this is their introduction or their only interaction with a trans narrative.
All right, Dasha Burns joins us now live on set. So you said it in your report there, Netflix is standing by Dave Chappelle. What's Dave Chappelle saying?
Well, he's not responding directly to requests for comment about this, but as you know, he's certainly no stranger to controversy, Tom. And just recently, he performed at a star-studded and sold-out event at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. And at times, he took aim at Twitter and at cancel culture. At one point, he received a standing ovation, and in response to that, he said, "If this is what getting canceled looks like, then I love it." So if that's any indication, it does not seem like he is backing down, and Netflix is not either at this point, Tom.
Okay, Dasha, we thank you for that.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.